On the morning of the 18th of July, 2022, on the hottest day England had ever recorded, a day that would crack 40 degrees Celsius, a 19-year-old female European bison stepped out of a trailer at the edge of an ancient Kent wood and walked straight into a thicket of invasive rhododendron. When she came out, she was wearing it like a crown, glossy leaves tangled across her horns, oil from the plant coating her forehead. The two rangers at the fence, Tom Gibbs and Donovan Wright, watched her, half laughing. She had, on her first afternoon in an English wood, invented her own insect repellent. She was the first wild bison to walk British soil in thousands of years, and she almost certainly had no ancestors that had walked British soil at all. The wood she stepped into is called Wilder Blean and Thorndon. It is part of one of the largest surviving blocks of ancient semi-natural woodland in England, more than 11 square miles of it. Parts of the reserve are over 1,000 years old. Chaucer's pilgrims may have walked its droveways on their way to Canterbury. When Kent Wildlife Trust bought its 490-hectare piece in December of 2003, the wood was in trouble. 40% was conifer plantation, drilled in during the 1970s for timber. Another 40% was sweet chestnut coppice grown so densely that the ancient oaks and hornbeams beneath were being outshaded and outcompeted. For 20 years, the trust coppiced, felled, cut rides through the plantations, sent volunteers with chainsaws and clipboards, and nothing was quite working. So in 2019, together with Wildwood Trust, they made a decision most British conservationists considered somewhere between eccentric and irresponsible. They would import 3 animals from Europe of a species that had almost certainly never lived in Britain, spend £1,125,000 doing it, and trust those 3 animals to do in a few years what 20 years of human work had not. The wood was not lost, it had lost the animal that made it a wood. Almost everyone said it would take a generation. Subscribe. You are going to watch it happen inside a decade. So why does a wood need a bison at all? The answer sits further back in time than most restoration stories go. At the end of the last ice age, roughly 10 to 12,000 years ago, the wooded lowlands of Britain were shaped by animals no one alive has ever seen. The aurochs, an enormous wild ox from which modern cattle descend, wild boar, red deer, and a species of bison called Bison priscus, the steppe bison, a shaggy, cold-adapted grazer that once ranged across the whole of northern Europe. Then the climate warmed. The forest closed in around it. And somewhere between 6,000 and 12,000 years ago, depending on which paleontologist you ask, the last steppe bison in Britain died. Nobody hunted it to extinction. The weather changed under its feet. What it left behind was a woodland that had evolved for millions of years to be shaped by very large animals, trees that expected to be shoved against, bark that expected to be stripped, ground that expected to be rolled in. And once the animal was gone, the wood was left with something no ecologist would call broken, but no ecologist would call whole either. Trees grew tall and did not fall. Dead wood was scarce because nothing knocked living wood over. Clearings closed in because nothing was there to open them. The light on the forest floor thinned year after year, century after century. The fungi and beetles and cavity-nesting birds and bats that depend on standing deadwood found less and less of what they needed. This is the trap. An ancient woodland deprived of its large disturbance mammals does not slowly recover into a more pristine version of itself. It slowly darkens, and there is nothing you can do with a chainsaw that fixes it. A chainsaw does the same thing every time. A bison, drunk on its own hunger and irritation and instinct, does something different every day. The wood evolved to be shaped by that improvisation. It cannot be repaired by a plan. The Wilder Blean team had a difficult conclusion to face. If they wanted the wood, they needed the animal. But there was no British bison to bring back, so they looked outward. The European bison, Bison bonasus, is not the same species as the extinct steppe bison. It is a cousin, a survivor. Europe's largest land mammal, extinct in the wild by the 1920s. The last free-ranging one was shot in the Caucasus Mountains in 1927. 54 animals survived in European zoos and private estates. Every wild bison in Europe today descends from just 12 founder animals. 12. According to the European Bison Pedigree book kept at Białowieża National Park, there were 12,209 European bison worldwide at the end of 2024. 9,762 of those were living in the wild. The global population grew by more than 1,000 animals, an 8.4% increase in a single year. Genetic work published in Nature Communications in 2016 showed that the modern wisent is actually a hybrid, descended from the vanished steppe bison and from the ancestors of aurochs and cattle. It is not a British native. It is a distant relative doing an approximate job, a proxy. The team decided to bring 3 of them to Kent. They needed rangers, and Kent Wildlife Trust called the job, only half-jokingly, the coolest vacancy in Britain. They expected a few dozen applications from ecology graduates. They received more than 1,200. Some came with cover letters. Some came with videos. A few came with drawings, bison sketched in pencil and charcoal. At least one applicant sent a song. The magazine Discover Wildlife delightedly called the whole thing 2021's coolest job vacancy. The 2 chosen were Tom Gibbs, previously a conservation officer with the Hearts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust, and Donovan Wright, known to everyone as Don. Between them, they had no prior experience of managing bison. Nobody in Britain did. There was no manual. They helped build a 43-kilometre fence, an outer fence for people, an inner electric fence for the animals, because under the Dangerous Wild Animals Act of 1976, European bison in the United Kingdom are legally classified as dangerous animals, which, the Trust points out, they mostly are not. In the Netherlands, bison and the public share the same forests. But the law is the law, and the fence went up. The method rested on a decision most British conservationists would have found suspicious. The team was not going to try to re-wild Blean. They were going to wild it. The word rewilding, in strict use, implies putting something back the way it was. But the way Blean was is a very long time ago, and the animal it was shaped by is gone forever. Wilder Blean was not a restoration. It was an experiment in what a modern proxy could do. Bison bonasus was chosen because of its behavior, not its lineage. European bison browse. They eat leaves and bark from trees, not just grass. Their heads sit higher than the American bison's. They have 14 pairs of ribs where the American bison has 15. And their horns curve forward rather than out to the side. They fell trees by rubbing against them for the pleasure of it. They wallow, creating shallow bowls of bare earth that collect rainwater. They walk the same paths again and again until those paths become corridors. They shed their thick winter coats in spring, leaving hair caught in bramble that birds gather for nests. Every one of those behaviors was, ecologically speaking, the missing engine. 3 females were brought to Kent. 2 young ones from Fota Wildlife Park in Cork, Ireland. The matriarch, a 19-year-old carrying the memory of a previous difficult pregnancy, from the Highland Wildlife Park in Scotland. The bull came later, from Germany, a male whose bloodline traced back to the founding 12, from the rarer lowland Caucasian line. He was delayed for months by post-Brexit paperwork. He finally arrived on the 23rd of December, 2022, in torrential rain. He walked to the door of his transport crate. took one look at the cold Kent woodland and refused to leave the warm trailer until the 3 females were brought near. There was one small detail that made the story turn. The matriarch was carrying a heavy parasite load when she arrived. Rangers noted it, and one afternoon they watched her deliberately eat yew, a plant that is toxic to most mammals. Her parasite count in the weeks that followed dropped sharply. Nobody had told her what to eat. She had, it seems, treated herself. Within weeks of release, the herd had done more work on the woodland than the previous 20 years of conservation had managed. They thrashed through the invasive rhododendron. They trampled brambles into pathways. They rubbed against silver birches until the trees came down. They stripped bark off willows, killing some outright and leaving them standing dead. Which, if you are a woodpecker or a beetle or a bat, is not a loss but a housing opportunity. Here is the cascade. A bison strips a strip of bark from a young birch. The tree weakens, fungi move in, fungi hollow the trunk. Beetle larvae colonize the rotting wood. A great spotted woodpecker drills a hole to reach the larvae. A pied flycatcher, later, uses the abandoned hole to nest. A bat roosts under a loose flap of bark in the summer, and where nothing was living in that patch of wood a year before, a small city has appeared. Now multiply that across a hectare, across dozens of hectares. Add in the dust baths, the bison lie down and roll in bare earth, and the bowls they leave collect rain, become puddles, fill with midge larvae, feed dragonflies. Add in the paths, wide enough for a fox to trot down, or a slow worm to bask across. Add in the dung. Reserve staff found dung beetle larvae in bison droppings within weeks. In March of 2023, the project brought in reinforcements. Iron Age pigs, a breed selected to look and behave like the wild boar that once rooted through British woods. English Longhorn cattle. Exmoor ponies. Different mouths, different feet, different habits. Each species reshaping the wood in a way the others could not. The wood, after 20 years of quiet retreat, had suddenly acquired an ecosystem engineering team, and it began keeping different accounts. The first surprise came less than 2 months after release. On the 9th of September 2022, rangers found a calf. Nobody had known. One of the 2 young females had been quietly pregnant when she boarded the ferry from Ireland. Britain's first wild-born bison calf in thousands of years was, by that point, already breathing Kent air. The announcement was held for 6 weeks. On the 8th of September, Queen Elizabeth II had died, and the country was in mourning. The Trust waited until October to tell the world. More calves followed. Documentary crews arrived. By October of 2025, the Blean herd numbered 9, including a 3rd-generation female, born to a mother who had herself been born in the wood. The biodiversity numbers, too, began to arrive. Kent Wildlife Trust's baseline surveys found 178 species of spider in the reserve, including Pistius truncatus, first recorded in the United Kingdom in 20 years, and Walkenaria mitrata, not seen in Britain since 2004. A rare fungus beetle, Disoleucus niverostris, turned up for the first time since 1988. Reserve manager Christina Juan reported that Lagria atripes, a beetle previously declared extinct in the United Kingdom, has been spotted more than once. The heath fritillary, a very rare butterfly, is present in good numbers. But an honest accounting has to include what the numbers do not show. None of these species are yet proven to be there because of the bison. Some of them may simply have been overlooked before. The bison area sits partly in an old conifer plantation, and when the first invertebrate baseline surveys were taken, the trap counts inside the bison area were actually lower than in the ungrazed control areas nearby. The engineers had only just arrived. The wood had not caught up yet. The famous claim sometimes attached to Wilder Blean that a herd of bison stores enough carbon to be equivalent to taking 40 past 3,000 cars off the road is not about Blean at all. It refers to a separate 170 bison project in Romania. The Kent numbers are far more modest. Kent Wildlife Trust does not pretend otherwise. And the 4 bison bridges, engineered structures that will let the herd cross under public footpaths and expand their range from 50 hectares to 200, are still, as of mid-2026, described as nearing completion. Not open. Not confirmed. The original spring 2025 target has slipped. The soft figure at the heart of the project's public identity is worth naming too. Kent Wildlife Trust says the bison are the first wild bison in Britain for 6,000 years. Some paleontologists put the last steppe bison in Britain closer to 10,000 or 12,000. The species is a different species. The wood being restored, if that is even the right verb, is a wood that was there long before the wood that is there now. The team running Wilder Blean will tell you all of this without prompting. That is one of the reasons to trust them. In early 2026, 5 of the Blean bison, including animals born inside that Kent wood, were loaded into trailers and driven north. They now graze a 700-acre enclosure on the Castletown estate in Cumbria, between the Eden and Esk rivers, north of Carlisle. Britain's second free-roaming bison herd. Wildwood Trust Director General Paul Whitfield told the Press Association in June that the animals were behaving brilliantly. At least one of the transferred females is thought to be pregnant. Calves may arrive in the autumn. The herd at Blean is now smaller. But the wood the founding animals shaped is not smaller. Trees they stripped of bark stand dead and full of life. Paths they carved through the birch scrub are used by foxes and slow worms and rabbits. A third-generation calf, born in 2025, browses on plants her grandmother thrashed her way toward on that 40-degree afternoon in July. The wood was not lost. It had lost the animal that made it a wood. It could not do the job alone. And no one holding a chainsaw was ever going to do the job for it. What Wilder Blean asked was whether a distant cousin, a species that likely never walked British soil, imported at some expense, wrapped in 43 kilometers of fence, could do the work anyway. So far, the wood is answering yes. If the mechanics of bringing landscapes back to life by refusing to be strict about the past interest you, subscribe. There are Scottish glens returned to forest by the simple decision to remove the sheep. There are Austrian mountainsides growing kiwis because a farmer refused to prune his trees. There are miniature Japanese forests reaching full canopy in 15 years because someone planted them too close together, on purpose. The logic behind each one is just as counterintuitive as this one.